This Spider-Man Homecoming fan theory about Peter Parker's parents is the saddest thing you'll hear all week. Spider-Man does whatever a spider can, which in this case causes fans to cry buckets of big, ugly tears. Do you remember that fan theory I covered about how Peter Parker carries the memory of his late Uncle Ben with him through their shared love of film? Yeah, that was sad in like a bittersweet way. This fan theory, this is just an emotional gut punch. Honestly, I wasn't prepared for it, and chances are you aren't either, so you might want to grab a box of tissues or a security blanket, maybe like a pint of Ben & Jerry's, because today's episode of The Dan Cave is all about the saddest Spider-Man fan theory that I've ever heard. Now, if you're a fan of Spider-Man, you probably know that Peter Parker's parents are no longer in the picture, and the boy who'd become Old Webhead was raised by his Aunt May and his Uncle Ben. While Uncle Ben's tragic death is what would ultimately inspire Peter to become a superhero, the tragic deaths of his parents were considered more to be just a fact of life than a defining trait for Peter Parker. In fact, for 6 years after Spider-Man's debut, his parents, Richard and Mary Parker, had no real backstory whatsoever. But that all changed in 1968's The Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 5, which revealed that Spider-Man's parents had been murdered by the Red Skull. And no, not the crazy super Nazi version. This was like the third version of the Red Skull. He was a Soviet spy dressed like the Red Skull named Albert Malik. So why did the Red Skull have the Parkers murdered? Well, because he learned they weren't the mild-mannered Peter parent he thought they were at all. Rather, they were secret agents, spies working for the CIA and Nick Fury, as was later revealed in an Untold Tales of Spider-Man story. Once he uncovered the Parkers' deception, the Red Skull had their plane sabotaged and Peter's parents perished in the ensuing crash. Now, this new theory, which comes courtesy of Reddit's My Count, doesn't address skullduggery or spycraft or anything like that as it pertains to Richard and Mary Parker, but it does offer a heartbreaking new idea of what happened to Peter's parents and why they're no longer on this mortal coil. The theory maintains that the Parkers died in a plane crash, which is extra poignant given how heavily flight and crashing planes factor into the climax of Homecoming. But this Redditor's not just talking about any plane crash. This theory is alleging that Richard and Mary Parker died during the tragic events of 9/11. It sounds bleak, and it is, but let's take a look at the evidence as the theory lays it out. At the beginning of the film, Happy Hogan asks if Peter's ever been on a private jet, to which Peter replies that this is the first time I've been on any plane. And that isn't too out of the ordinary for a teenager, because I know plenty of folks who never flew at all until well into their adulthood. Still, it could be considered evidence of perhaps a deeper trauma for Peter. Maybe it's something he's just going along with so he can impress Tony Stark. Given the nature of the Vulture's abilities, most of Spider-Man's battles with him take place in midair, but that doesn't change the fright or the shock that Peter experiences during his first tussle with the Vulture, in which he's suddenly taken by surprise and forcefully dragged into the air. This fear again rears its ugly head when Peter's trying to save his classmates from certain death during a trip to Washington, D.C. While atop the Washington Monument, Peter freezes up, and when his in-suit AI Karen asks why, he replies that he's never been this high before. And this theory alleges that it's because Peter has a fear of height, which I don't entirely buy, but then again, the recent PS4 game established that Peter Parker used to have a fear of heights, and forcing himself to climb the Empire State Building helped him to conquer it. Given that that video game version of Spidey is a little bit older than the one we see in Homecoming, maybe it's possible this fear could still dwell within the young Spider-Man. During the film's epic finale, Spider-Man not only has to crawl his way out of the debris of a collapsed building in an homage to the iconic Amazing Spider-Man number 33, but he also has to prevent a plane from crashing into the New York City skyline. Now that would have been a pretty harrowing and on-the-nose way to confront one's deep-seated traumas, and it makes Peter's perseverance all the more impressive. Lastly, the theory looks at the timeline of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Following the release of the first Avengers film, most Marvel movies have taken place in relative real time, and that's to say the year in which they're released. Spider-Man Homecoming seemingly threw a spanner in the works with their subtitle about the movie taking place 8 years after the events of the Avengers, but Marvel has since walked those comments back. They've confirmed that Infinity War takes place in 2018, which is 6 years after the events of 2012's The Avengers. Captain America Civil War took place in 2016, which marked Spider-Man's first appearance, and Homecoming takes place just a few months after that film. In Homecoming, it's established that Spider-Man is 15 years old, which, if we do the math, would mean that he was born in 2001. And that means the timeline of events leading to his parents' deaths could feasibly work out as laid out by this theory. That would mean that Peter's parents died when he was still a very, very young baby, so he wouldn't really have much of a memory of them. Now, I don't know about you, but now I really don't feel so good, Mr. Stark, because for the most part, this theory doesn't offer any major changes to the existing Spider-Man story as we know it, so I can appreciate it as a bit of poignant headcanon that adds an extra layer to the events of Homecoming in particular. Because not only is it a story of Peter proving himself and coming to his own as a hero, but it's forcing Peter to confront his past in a very real and unsettling way. I don't necessarily buy into the whole acrophobia angle given the nature of what Peter does as Spider-Man, but I appreciate the theorist's attempt at trying to tie everything together. Now, I know this sounds silly, but some people out there questioned whether September 11th actually happened in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And to answer that, some commenters have pointed to the fact that Killian mentions Bin Laden in Iron Man 3, so chances are that yes, it did also happen in the MCU. What isn't addressed here is whether Peter's parents were still spies and if their deaths were part of a larger conspiracy, but frankly, that's opening up a can of worms that I have no interest in going down, and please, keep things civil in the comments. One thing we do know is that things are going to get a whole lot weirder for Peter Parker when he crossed paths with Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio in 2019 Spider-Man Far From Home. But what do you think of this fan theory? Would you want a movie about Peter's parents as maybe Cold War super spies? Like and share this video, let me know in the comments below, and give me a heartbreaking thumbs up while you're there. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that little notification bell so you never miss an episode, because if you don't, not only will you look absolutely foolish in front of your friends and family, but you'll miss out on next week's show, all about the story of how astronaut Neil Armstrong was selected not just to be part of the first manned mission to the moon, but also to become an elite assassin for a group of communist dissidents, and all because he just had to steal someone else's reservation at an elite Manhattan restaurant in First Manchurian Candidate Night. Until next time, keep on digging.